Where is student ministry going in the future? What are the trends that we should be paying attention to in our churches? And what should we be doing about all this research we're seeing? On this episode of Student Ministry Connection, we're kicking off 2026 focusing on the future of student ministry and how God might just be setting us up for something big. Let's get ready to connect and grow. Welcome to Student Ministry Connection. My name is Steve Cullum, and Happy New Year, everyone. Well, at least for those who are listening soon after the release in January 2026. For the past several years, I've become more and more fascinated with research and statistics. It's probably what led me to actually start doing my research with the Great Commission Research Network last year. And some of that research I love reading are from groups like Barna and Fuller Youth Institute and Springtide. And just this last year, Barna released a report that showed some very interesting statistics about church attendance, particularly around the younger generation, especially Gen Z. And while I love all this research, I also get lost in the numbers sometimes and the academic talk that surrounds it. I've even experienced that in writing my own academic article that I'm trying to get published right now. It can easily become so heady, but I'm guessing that many of you are probably like me, and you just want people to make it practical. And so that's why I'm so thankful for people like Carey Nieuwhof, who have been getting really practical about church trends over the last few years. In fact, Carey just released a podcast episode and a report focused on the 7 disruptive church trends that will rule 2026. I'll have a link to his podcast and the report in the show notes for this episode because I highly recommend you check them out. And while it would be amazing to have Carey on this podcast, I doubt that's going to happen anytime soon. But just in case you're listening, Carey, you always have an open invitation. So instead, I wanted to highlight 2 of the trends that Carey mentions, especially as they pertain to student ministry. And I'll also add some of my own thoughts from my recent and ongoing research around youth leader longevity, as well as some of the things that we're noticing as I work with youth leaders through the National Network of Youth Ministries. And just as a heads up, I'm not going to be offering a lot of action steps or solutions in this episode. I mostly wanted to just raise awareness. And then many of our upcoming episodes will be focused on potential next steps for us. In fact, I'm so excited for you to hear our next episode where we'll dive into some very practical steps on how we can set ourselves up for longevity in ministry. But before we jump into those 2 trends, I wanted to pause and just remind you that we are close to our 10-year anniversary for this podcast. And while I'm still open to your suggestions on how to celebrate, here are 2 things I'd like to do for that episode. Number 1, I'm planning on having some giveaways. So make sure you listen to our anniversary episode to learn how to win, but also pay attention to our social media. And number 2, I'd like to highlight some of you. So please consider sending in a short voice memo or a written email to studentministryconnection@gmail.com by January 27th, 2026. You can share your favorite episode, how the podcast has impacted you and your ministry, or maybe how it helped you get connected with others in student ministry. It's always great to read your reviews on the podcast sites, but I thought this would be a great way to highlight you, which beyond God himself is really the reason why this podcast exists. So like I said earlier, Carey Nieuwhof just dropped an episode of his leadership podcast entitled 7 Disruptive Church Trends That Will Rule 2026. And as I was listening to that episode and reading through the full document that he shares for free on his website, 2 of those 7 really stood out to me. The first one is the first one that he shared. In fact, it's an update on the same trend he talked about in 2025. It's that Gen Z is leading the surge in church attendance. Now, let's get this straight. This doesn't mean that church attendance has completely changed or that Christianity is on the rise in the world. In fact, many studies are saying quite the opposite. Research shows that the United States in particular is still becoming less and less Christian. But what we're seeing is a surge of people turning to Jesus. And the largest demographic among those are Gen Z, specifically men. So, how Carrie puts it, Gen Z is in revival and a retreat at the same time. But the recent numbers we're seeing in church attendance growth is being led by Gen Z and then millennials after that. Carrie also notes that the consistency of church attendance has also grown since 2020, nearly doubling for Gen Z and millennials from about one time a month to now about 2 times a month. And for those who are wondering about Gen Alpha, because they're starting to actually be in our youth groups, there just isn't enough data yet to state anything official. They're just so young right now. But the next couple years will definitely tell us where they end up and if the potential trend continues with them. The second trend I want to highlight is the one that Carrie mentions sixth. He mentions that senior pastors are aging out and few are replacing them. Now, while this does seem to be the case, you probably noticed that he focused on senior pastors, and that's really Carrie's lane. I want to turn our attention, though, to the part of the ministry world that we live in, the student ministries pastor, the ones who are focused heavily on the next generation and families. Barna pointed out in 2022 that 71% of leaders said that they are concerned or somewhat concerned about the quality of future Christian leaders. My question is, what are they or what are we going to do about that? If we're concerned, then that's on us to fix this trend. How many people are we equipping for leadership? How many people are we calling to leadership? And how many people are we setting up for the future? I feel like every time I turn around, I'm hearing about another Bible college closing. And I know some of that has to do with other factors, but I know some of it is because enrollment is down. And sure, college is getting expensive and not everyone can afford it and not everyone needs to go to college and seminary. But that's just one of the things I'm noticing. As I've said before, I'm hearing from church staffing companies that there are so many more youth pastor job openings than there are available youth pastors. I even have several churches that I'm working with right now who've been looking for quite a long time. And these are solid churches too. So what are we as student ministry leaders going to do about all of this? You've heard me share about this a little before, but I wanted to revisit some of those thoughts in this episode. John Tyson states that revival is God's action, not something that you can manufacture or produce. And while I completely agree with that statement, I also feel like God's put some of this in a way in our hands as the church. I mean, the church is his plan for reaching the world with the gospel. He's entrusted us to do that with him and for him. So I think God has handed us the keys, so to speak, and said, what are you going to do with this thing that I've given you? And that's the question I want to pose to all of you who are listening. What are we going to do with all this? I believe that we have the potential of seeing one of the biggest revivals the world has ever seen. And yet again, it seems to be starting with young people, which almost always happens. And yet, we currently have a huge hole in the amount of people who are willing to step up and disciple these young people. We have a large number of people who are leaving student ministry for various reasons. And churches all over the U.S. and all over the world are looking for solid leaders to lead their ministry to teenagers and young adults. I know it's difficult sometimes, and I know it's especially tough when you don't have the support you really need from your senior pastor or elders or parents. I know it's becoming harder and harder to pastor kids as they're struggling with depression and suicidal ideation. I know it's tougher to build a solid team. I know the pay isn't what you would like it to be, and I know there's some significant church hurt. I faced it myself. But we need you. The next generation needs you, and the church needs you. Because if we don't help position the church to disciple these young people who are turning to Jesus right now, this potential trend and potential revival is just going to turn into a blip in the timeline of history, where we'll look back years from now and go, you remember that time back in the mid-2020s when we had that small spike in church attendance and then it dropped dramatically after that? God has positioned us here for such a time as this. In a lot of ways, the odds might be stacked against us, but God is bigger. And He's called us to this ministry to make a significant difference in the lives of the next generation and to lead out within the church and within the world on their behalf. So, what are we going to do about it? A bonus trend I also wanted to quickly highlight was Carrie's third one, that evangelism is getting bolder and more direct. Rather than attracting people to our youth groups and churches, there's beginning to be a push to be more bold about our faith and bring Jesus to people rather than waiting for them to come and check out our church. The latest research, according to Carrie, tells us that 80% of non-churchgoers say that they would come to church if someone invited them. And we know from other recent research that 70% or more of people will be open to a spiritual conversation when asked. So let's make sure that we're training our students on how to share their faith rather than just expecting people to show up at our programs and hear the gospel. Well, thank you so much for being here for this episode. If you enjoy content like this, please make sure to rate this podcast on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube and share it with other leaders in student ministry. I know you hear me say this a lot, but it really does help the podcast, and it especially helps me to get on great guests. And I also want to say a huge thank you to all of you who have joined my prayer and financial partnership team so far. Year-end donations for 2025 were higher than normal, and I am so thankful for each one of you. If you're new to the podcast, know that this is an extension of my ministry with National Network of Youth Ministries, which means that I'm able to do this for free, along with all the rest of my ministry, because of generous donations. If you'd like to learn more about joining either my prayer or my financial partnership teams, you can reach out to me, or you can follow the links in the show notes, or just head over to nnym.org/Steve Cullum. And finally, if you're looking for a speaker for your next event, head over to the Speaker Hub from Youth Ministry Hub. You'll find me and several other vetted and experienced speakers who you can book for your next youth group, camp, retreat, or team training. That link is youthmenhub.com/speakerhub, and you can also find that in the show notes. This next episode, I'll be speaking with Jody Livingston about longevity. Not only has he been serving in student ministry for over 25 years, but he just wrote a book about what he's learned and recommends for others. So we'll be taking a deep dive into all of that in the next episode, and I really hope you're here for it. But until then, be sure to stay connected, and may God bless your ministry.